Jordan and Gretzky, Serena and Ruth. Remembering great ones is easy to do. But what about the no-names who spent their whole lives long snapping footballs and catching sack flies? They're guys, remember that guy. Remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy, remember that guy. They're just gonna remember some guys now.
Running hook, blocked by Mutombo. Morning, blocked by Dikembe again. Oh, that's the old Dikembe from Remember That Show, where we mine our memories for nuggets of nostalgia about peripheral players past and present. Hey there, folks. It's me, one of your hosts, James. The Orioles, is recording this, have lost 9 straight playoff games.
9 straight losses, but we're going to turn this one into a W real quick. Diaz, back with you once again. But we have a very special guest. He has 27 somethings. Please introduce yourself.
You know what? I've got 27. I couldn't even think of something to say there. But it's me, the very special guest Xavier, who's had to work in office for the first time in a very long time.
So what I was going for there was, the 27 rings that your Yankees have. But I guess you only have what, 4 or 5?
I have
5.
96,
I can tell you he has 5.
96, 98, 99, 2000, 2009, 5.
Yeah, no, I can tell you exactly how many championships the Yankees have in our lifetime.
Amazing.
I also don't I didn't want to talk baseball today anyway,
Well, let's not talk baseball then, because, as I said in our Discord, there were 2 big games today in the RTG universe. There was Orioles game 1, which is a game that happened, and that's all that we have to say about it.
Someone's got to be the first team to win after losing game 1 eventually.
Just like that, just like 3-0 in basketball, it's going to happen eventually. It's going to happen against the Sixers. We all know it's going to. But across the pond, the Diaz Bowl was played today, and it was everything you could expect it to be. Newcastle against Wimbledon, my 2 English football teams, separated only by 3 divisions and about whatever Newcastle's net worth is, that's about the amount in financial separation between the 2 teams. And there's really nothing better that can illustrate that gap than the fact that this game was originally supposed to be played home for Wimbledon. It was just another, Newcastle has had, I believe, 8 straight cup ties drawn away, with the one exception being that we got drawn against Man City at home. Just a horrific stretch of just not good draws for Newcastle. And it takes a literal act of God, Yahweh, Vishnu, whatever God you pray to, for Newcastle to get a home game, because the infrastructure underneath Wimbledon Stadium just got fucked. And the field looks nothing. It looks more like a miniature golf course now than it does like a football pitch. Have you guys seen the pictures of it?
Yeah. Wild.
I think it's an accurate assessment. It looks more like a mini golf course now. It's terrible, and it's going to take a lot for them to repair that field. And, thoughts out to everybody at Wimbledon. But because of that, and because of the short notice, the game then gets drawn back to Newcastle home. And I got to say, it's very weird watching a game in which you are literally just hoping that both teams have fun. I feel at one with my inner Rob Lowe right now. And I think for both teams, it turned out about as good as you could have possibly hoped for it. Newcastle does win 1-0 thanks to a penalty at the end of the first half, which was so justified. Miggy got basically nut tapped in the box. It was one of the most blatant penalties in the box I've ever seen in my life. But Newcastle gets that goal to go up. They only win by that margin, 1-0. Wimbledon had, I think the final stat was 13% of the ball, but defended their asses off the whole game. To not give up any goals in open play to a team that is 3 divisions above you is truly remarkable. And from the Newcastle side, all that mattered was win this game in advance. They didn't play their A team. They played more like their A- B+ team. And we're kind of just clearly going through the motions the whole game. Never really any drama. Wimbledon, up the Wombles, up the Dons. Great defensive effort. And Newcastle hosting a round of 16 against Chelsea. And let's just hope that Cole Palmer doesn't score 4 goals in 20 minutes again.
I gotta say, I'm not making any commitments right now, but the whole The only time we get a home draw is this one fucking juggernaut comes in and stomps our brains out. And other than that, we always have to go on the road for our big matches. I'm just saying, you're selling me on Newcastle a little bit, Diaz.
There is...
I could use some more of this misery in my life.
But the good thing is, at least this time, the bad people with the money are you, if you're a Newcastle fan. And it's good to be on that side of it for once. That's it for me as far as making memories. I'm not sure, Xavier, with your added commute times, if you've had enough time for the hippocampus to get to work lately.
You know what's funny is I've given myself extra commute time because I could be there in 5 minutes if I drove, but I wanted to walk. So I walked both days to work, and today I actually left early in the morning to walk to Whole Foods because there's a Federal Donuts there, and I picked up Federal Donuts for the group. But one thing that is making memories for me is Arsenal beat PSG in the Champions League, which I was watching at a sports bar at work.
We did that last year. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah, those are the bad oil money guys. We don't like those oil money guys.
Because they're the French oil money guys.
The French and Qatari oil money guys. And Diaz likes the English and the Saudi oil money guys.
Listen, everybody in the West loves Saudi. You know what happens as journalists if you don't.
Also, Gonzaga to the Pac-12 happened, which is interesting.
Honestly, it makes an incredible amount of sense, except for the fact of something I commented on last week, which is that like even the incredibly high tier basketball teams are getting fucked over by all of this football. This and then like the UConn move that what was it, the Big 12 pushing for potentially. Like these are the only times I'm seeing basketball drive the conversation all. I'm just saying, at least with this miserable conference realignment, that's a little bit of variety, a little bit of extra flavor. Ooh, it's a different sport this time.
Oh, Towns to the Knicks. Wasn't even thinking about it. Because it's weird, because they've been kind of like, they haven't like officially said anything, really. But it looks like the Knicks are getting Karl Anthony Towns. So
Can I say what the energy of this move reminds me of? And they're very different players, and like it can be a very different outcome. But when you said it's like the national people are loving it and like the hardcore Knicks people don't really love it. It's the same energy as when the Sixers signed Al Horford. Everybody was convinced signing of the year, and like I kind of deluded myself a little bit, but that little small voice in your gut, you know, sometimes that little bastard's got a good point or two.
It's interesting though, because you both know very well I did not like the OG Anunoby trade initially. So maybe if I have a bad feeling about it, it's a good idea. One thing I will say, he can shoot way better than any centers we've had in decades. Him and Jalen Brunson pick and pop, and Jalen driving, cutting out to a 7-footer hitting threes. I'll take that part.
Al Horford has a floor spacer next to Embiid. He's the best forward that Embiid's ever played with shooting wise. See, it works.
And you know, Horford, he's got that NBA championship ring. So even if he doesn't play great, if he can get us a ring, like Horford showed he can play for a championship team, just not the Sixers.
In your analogy, Karl Anthony Towns is going to be like 40 years old. They're also both Dominican. This is a nice little fun. I'm learning more as we go with this analogy. But in this analogy, Karl Anthony Towns goes back to Minnesota when he's like 36, 37, and in a backup role, then wins a ring. So
no, because Horford started with the Hawks, so he's going to leave the Knicks to go to somewhere where it works even worse, return to New York, and so yeah, Xavier, you've got another decade, but Karl Anthony Towns in this analogy will eventually win a title for the New York Knicks.
You know what? I can wait another decade for a Knicks title. If you told me right now that I had a 2% chance of the Knicks winning a title anytime over the next couple of years, or a 100% chance in 10 years, give me that one. Even if you said it was a 20% chance over the next 10 years, I'd still take the guaranteed one.
Don't mean a thing without the ring.
James, do you care about basketball other than Wemby, who I'm sure is just going to come back and have 30 and 20 next year?
That picture of him and Chris Paul was hilarious, by the way. It's the best thing since the Manute Bowl Muggsy picture.
It's very good, and the Chris Paul and Greg Popovich, I've always fucking hated this guy. Very firmly tongue-in-cheek, but just their general banter so far has been nice. I did, and I'm still going to just take 1 second to talk about a very fun Baltimore game that I did attend recently, the Ravens-Bills Sunday night game. My dad, he has had season tickets since 2007. I've been regularly going with him since 2008. And it was a fucking great game besides everything else. Like, the Ravens plastered the Bills, just beating their faces into the mud. And that Derrick Henry 87-yard touchdown run as the first play from scrimmage, easily a top 5 moment I've been in the stadium for there. But a thing that made it even a little bit more fun later on, this is just one of those things that, like, you get when you go to a bunch of home games, and I understand how privileged I am for that to have, like, been my life. I just want to clarify that. Halfway through, you've got your in-stadium trivia. Legend of the game today was Mark Ingram, so it was very running back focused trivia. And one of the questions was, which of these 3 Ravens, and it was the 2008-2009 roster, so it was like Ray Rice, Willis McGahee, LaRon McClain, who shares the record with Jamal Lewis for the longest touchdown run in Ravens history? Answer comes up, and everyone in the stadium just erupts into laughter because the answer was that LaRon McClain in 2008 against Dallas tied Jamal Lewis's record with an 82-yard run, which was no longer the record because Derrick Henry, just 2 quarters earlier, had set the new record with an 87-yard touchdown run. And just like
that was a Thanksgiving Day game, I want to say.
I believe you were correct. I believe it was a November 28th, 2008 game.
That sounds like Thanksgiving.
It was a fun moment, and like every year now that my dad and I go, we're a little closer to like him just physically not being able to do that shit anymore. And so it's winding down, and like, that's okay. I'm probably not going to take on the tickets because I don't have the same relationship with football that I did in 2008. It was just one of those things. In the last 17 years of going to these games with my dad, there are some things that you just like get to specifically have in the stadium that you wouldn't get otherwise. And it's just been nice to share them with that. The other thing that I want to talk about real quick to make you guys aware of, because I'm sure you haven't been following it, but I do just want to follow up on the quest for the Triple Crown of Tadej Pogačar. Poggy did go into the World Championships having won those 2 Grand Tours earlier, the Giro d'Italia and the Tour de France. First guy since 1998 to do it. That happened before Poggy was born. So this is just an unprecedented smashing already. And the Triple Crown is that double, which is done by, I believe, about 8 people or so in history, and the World Championships, which is a like 1-day race, about 150 miles generally, depending on the course. Just to wind up for this season for a second, essentially, Poggy has raced 55 total days. He has ridden a bike for 55 days across this whole season. He has won either a 1-day race, every single one that he's entered, or a stage in one of the Grand Tours in which he's like quickly rocketing up the leaderboards despite this being his first year out of the youth classification. He won 23 days that he went out there and rode of the 55 this past season. And that's just fucking insane. He did win the World Championships in Switzerland. Like, this is the 3rd ever Triple Crown. The only guys that have done before are like the Belgian GOAT, Eddie Merckx, and Stephen Roche, who's very much like a Mickey Mantle, what could have been, but too many knee injuries. And again, kid's 26, entering his prime. It's gonna get tiring eventually. Like, this might be the last year of just unambiguously enjoyable Pogačar. And so I'm trying to like take it in because he will become the boring behemoth at some point. But right now he is just fucking incredible. So those are the 2 things that are making memories for me right now. But that's not all that we have. We've got another category this week of guys that are ripe for the plucking into this haul. Only one of them though. And Diaz, I wonder if you could please tell us what it is that's going to link the 3 guys that we have today.
So we had briefly talked about on previous episodes, the kind of Tim Anderson phenomenon of this player who comes in and looks amazing at first, like a surefire Hall of Fame trajectory. And then for one reason or another, it kind of just falls off entirely. We're not looking for our long career seasoned vets who were kind of just consistent the whole time. We're looking for, I guess another way to think of this is imagine if a Linsanity run lasted for years. That's kind of what we're looking for with these guys. For me, this is an easy opportunity to talk about my favorite era of baseball, the 2007 to 2011 Philadelphia Phillies.
I'm just interested to see which of these it is. There's a couple guys who crash pretty hard. I guess it's a question of like, what's the proper lead up to one of those crashes?
Well, I mean, I will say Roy Halladay is not one of the crashes that we're talking about today.
Dude. No.
Oh my
No.
God.
I'll leave editor's discretion whether or not to keep that in. But so the '07 to 2011 Phillies are the greatest baseball team that I ever got to watch. And when you think about the core, the guys who were there for all of those years, the guys who came up through the minor league system, there's a few that really stand out. You've got Jimmy Rollins is kind of like the de facto captain in the clubhouse by virtue of him initially coming up in 2001. The most beloved publicly is probably Chase Utley. You've got the Always Sunny reference. You've got every woman in the tri-state area love Chase Utley. You have Cole Hamels as the original ace before all the other aces then came and joined him. But all of those guys kind of teetering in that same range of Hall of Very Good. I will always bang the drum for Jimmy Rollins to be in the Hall of Fame. I firmly believe if you are the all-time hits leader for one of the oldest franchises in all of baseball, that's the thesis statement. We don't need to see anything more. The guy I want to talk about today, I'm not going to make his Hall of Fame case. There is none. But the trajectory he was on to start his career, certainly worthy of that. And he is the big piece. He is number 6, Ryan Howard.
I know it. It's fun when you talk about the Phillies or other Philadelphia sports people that you love.
Well, I mean, this is a vestige of my childhood that we're talking about here with Ryan Howard. Ryan Howard was born November 19th, 1979 in Florissant, Missouri. He was a standout at Lafayette High School, and he earned a full scholarship to stay in-state at Missouri State. Across 172 games for his collegiate career, he's showing some early signs of his power. Hits 50 homers across those 172 games. And on the basis of that, in the 2001 MLB draft, the Phillies took him in the 5th round. So he's not a top prospect coming out, but certainly a priority for the Phillies to get in. And for those of you wondering at home, the first overall pick in the 2001 MLB draft, Joe Mauer. So pretty good year.
A 5th round pick is still getting like, he's sharing a page with 2 other guys for the local blog. By that point, you are going to, okay, we're getting 3 guys per post, but like you still get a full write-up in that post.
Right. The first round pick definitely gets his own post. I think the second pick gets his own post. And
first
then
3, but the first one you're getting like other pieces put out too. Like first one's getting multiple pieces, first 3 all get their own write-up, and then you're scrunching it together.
He gets a paragraph that says, keep an eye on this kid. And that's kind of what we're looking for with Ryan Howard as he comes in. But very quickly proves he's a lot more than, just this kid coming from a small college. He's mashing all throughout the minor leagues. In 2003, he plays at Clearwater in high A ball, and he's named the Player of the Year for the Florida State League. So next year, 04, he gets called up to Double-A, and he sets the Phillies minor league system record for most homers in a season with 46. This also led all of the minors for that year, and it was the most by any player in the minors since 1956. So the legend of Howard is already kind of starting to spread. But the big issue here is, and it's worthy to note, if a guy's hitting 46 homers in a minor league season, I think it's a fair question to ask, why isn't he being called up? Why does he have the opportunity to hit 46 home runs in the minors?
As soon as you started saying minor league record, I was like, oh, but it's a single season one. You can still be okay with guys setting single season minor league records. It's the career ones you want to be wary of.
No, totally fair. Yeah, what career minor league records? But yeah, single season, still the most since 1956. So it is fair to ask, why isn't he being called up? The Phillies at this time, 2003 is when he was named the High A Player of the Year for his league. 2003 was also the first season for the Phillies in their current ballpark, Citizens Bank Park. And to start the 2003 season, to open this new park and welcome in this new era of Phillies baseball, the Phillies signed Jim Thome to be their first baseman. So you have this guy who is an all-time great, who is a Hall of Famer, who was brought in to be the face of your new era, and all of a sudden, this 5th round pick that you took turns out to be a hell of a lot better than you ever thought he could be. You now have that classic dilemma of, do we trade our high potential minor league guy for some win now pieces, or do we take the risk? And this is kind of the question after the 04 season for Ryan Howard. early on, they're trying to experiment with, can we put him in right field? Can we put him in left? And Ryan Howard, he is the big piece. He's not the fast piece. Really doesn't stand a chance in the outfield. So they kind of quickly abandoned that experiment and realized, like, okay, he's strictly a first baseman. That's all he's going to be able to do. Unfortunately for the Phillies, but fortunately for Howard, Jim Thome is pretty banged up throughout the 2005 season. So Ryan Howard gets called up and has his first extended run in the major leagues after he had a September call-up in 2004. Plays 88 games, hits 22 home runs, 924 OPS, 63 RBI, and he is named the NL Rookie of the Year, putting up those numbers in just 88 games. And we had these questions the previous offseason. They demand answers now. The Phillies decide, we're going to take this leap of faith. We're going to move the surefire Hall of Famer, Jim Thome. They sent him to the Chicago White Sox for Aaron Rowand and announced that Ryan Howard is one of the new faces of the franchise. He will be the starting first baseman going forward. With all this pressure to replace an all-time great, Ryan Howard mashes like no Philly has ever mashed before. Entering this season, the single-season record for home runs by a Philadelphia Philly was 46, hit by Mike Schmidt, the second greatest third baseman of all time.
You can say Mike Schmidt's a better third baseman than Brooks Robinson. Like, defensively,
I put Brooks ahead of him.
Okay, I'll take it. I'm not going to fight you on it.
I only kind of believe it, but I do really believe it a little more than I kind of let on take, is Mike Schmidt is, I think, pretty overrated. You look at every single October run, as great as he was for as long as he was, and as consistently as the Phillies were in the playoffs, Mike Schmidt sucked almost every time in the playoffs. He had a good 1980 World Series, and that saves him.
I think Adrian Beltre and Manny Machado should get more discussion for greatest third baseman of all time, but I just want to leave that at that right now. That's not a conversation to get into, but I think both of those,
fair.
I'll go get my Adrian Beltre jersey. I love him. I had it. The only baseball jersey I own, actually not, I have Murakami. I have two third basemen. One is Adrian Beltre and one is Munetaka Murakami.
Two good jerseys to have. All that to say, Mike Schmidt, Phillies single season record, 46 homers. Ryan Howard for the 2006 season hits 58 homers. Bats .313 with a 1084 OPS and 149 RBI. The home runs and the RBI both lead all of baseball. Obviously, he's going to be named to the All-Star team, so he becomes an All-Star for the first time. And while he's there, he wins the home run derby 25-23 over David Wright in the final round. You put all this together, and you get the clear-cut NL MVP in his first full season playing Major League Baseball. But the Phillies themselves still struggling. They've been on kind of the edge of the playoffs for a few years now. And if there's one game I can point to this year to kind of perfectly encapsulate the 2006 Phillies experience, Ryan Howard had a game against Xavier's Yankees in interleague play where he hit 2 home runs, one of them landing in the third deck in right field at Citizens Bank Park. I believe he was the first one to ever do that. The seat where it landed is still marked by a red H to commemorate where it landed. And with his 2 homers and 7 RBI, Ryan Howard led the Phillies to a 9-7 loss to the New York Yankees. Just classic mid-2000s Phils. You have all the exceptional talent. Sometimes it's J-Roll having a crazy game. Sometimes it's Utley having a crazy game. But the consistent thing is it's never enough. They don't make it to the playoffs. 2007, teams start realizing that while Howard hits a lot of his homers to opposite field, if he's hitting it on the ground, he's almost exclusively pulling it every single time. So he becomes, to my best knowledge and to my recollection, one of the first players to start getting the extreme shifts that we started to see that eventually led to MLB having to put rules in place to effectively get rid of the shift as best as you could.
I feel like for historical record, we should mention like Ted Williams is one of the first people to get true 4-man shifts, but that's Ted fucking Williams, and this is like decades later.
Of course, yeah. I'm not saying he's the first ever, but I'm saying he's the first within the modern era.
Every plate appearance
in the modern era. Don't even think about it. Everybody's getting over on the right side of second base. And with that, his batting average is going to fall a lot. So he goes from .313 all the way down to .268. but the power stays consistent. He has another 47 home run season, so now having the 2 seasons with the most home runs in Phillies history. During that season, he hit his 100th homer for his career, and in so doing became the fastest player in MLB history to 100 homers in his career. It's a record he still holds, even with players like Aaron Judge who have come up recently and certainly mashed the hell out of the ball, but nobody mashed it harder, faster than Ryan Howard. This is also a season where the Phillies kind of finally turned that corner, most miraculously being 7 games back from the New York Mets with 17 to play, but still finding a way to clinch the division on game 162 to go back to the playoffs for the first time since 93, but we lose in 3 to the Rockies. Following season, that shifting worked out, so it's going to just become even more of a mainstay, and Howard's average falls to 251, now 62 points lower than that 313, but again, his power still unprecedented in Phillies history. He hits 48 homers to lead the National League, along with 146 RBI, again named an All-Star. And sure enough, 2008, your Phillies go on and win the whole World Series. Ryan Howard matching a couple homers in that World Series. So at this point, we're talking about a guy who's been a starter for 3 years. He's led the National League in home runs in 2 of them. He's become the fastest to 100 home runs in the history of baseball.
I mean, he's only the second ever player to win Rookie of the Year and MVP in consecutive years. I thought you were going to mention that at some point, so I was going to leave it off. But I know that because Cal Ripken is the first.
Oh, of course, yeah. And like, far be it from me to miss a Cal Ripken opportunity to get his name dropped into this pod. But it is an incredible start, an unprecedented start. Nobody's ever seen a start like this. In 2009. Howard is again going to lead the National League in RBI with 141. He has 45 home runs, so for the first time as a Philadelphia Philly, he fails to hit more home runs than Mike Schmidt's former franchise record, missing it by just 1. Truly a letdown of a season by Ryan Howard. But in the playoffs is where the memories are made, and up 2-1 in the NLDS in Game 4, the Phillies are down 2. Going to the bottom of the 9th and staring down a potential Game 5 winner-take-all back home at Citizens Bank. In the dugout, Ryan Howard is just pacing back and forth and just keeps saying one thing to all of his teammates. Just get me to the plate, boys. Just get me to the plate. Phillies are down 2. Howard is due up 5th in the inning. So sure enough, there's 2 out, 2 on when Ryan Howard steps to the plate. Rips a double to right center on a 1-2 pitch, ties the game up. The next batter, Jason Worth, knocks him in, and the Phillies go from being 1 strike away from a Game 5 to winning that Game 4 and winning the series, thanks to Ryan Howard's heroics. They play the Dodgers in the NLCS. They win in 5. Ryan Howard is named the MVP of the NLCS. And incredibly, the season ended right then. They didn't have a World Series that year. I was shocked to learn this. There was no World Series in 2009.
Yeah, there was no Japanese guy winning World Series MVP.
There was no Japanese porn addict winning World Series MVP.
Okay, I'm sorry. That is my favorite thing about Matsui.
Hideki Matsui's encyclopedic pornography library.
Yeah, it's okay. So, as someone who's been to Japan here, I love Japan. But there are people that will just be on their phones on the train, just reading porn. Straight up, because they're apparently not weird. Just a normal thing to do for businessmen after work is just read porn on the train. And so Matsui, just being open about it, is like, yeah, I have a massive porn collection of every VHS ever made. Would you like to see it? And it's not embarrassing at all to him. And I love that he's so open about it. I was like, yes, I can win World Series MVP and be an incredible baseball player. But have you seen my 10,000 volumes of porn? It's just matter of fact. There's nothing else about it. It's like, yes, I own this. Would you like to see?
The juxtaposition of the openness, but also like the absolute refusal to not pixelate every single genital is just staggering. It doesn't really compute with my simple American brain. But as we said, Hideki Matsui did not exist in 2009. There was no World Series. The Phillies just had to settle for being NLCS champions that year because they unfortunately did not play a World Series. Thankfully, 2010, we're able to get a season going again. And in 2010, Howard starts having a little bit of a fall off. He still has an OPS plus of 127, but he only hits 31 home runs. The Phillies are very successful in the regular season, but end up losing in the NLCS to the Giants that year. That takes us to 2011, which, for my money, of that 07 to 11 Phillies run that I mentioned, 2011 was the best of those teams. You had the four aces being Roy Halladay, Cole Hamels, Cliff Lee, and Roy Oswalt, and Joe Blanton. They set the franchise record for wins in that season. And Howard is still very good, but starting to look a little more human. He's 33 homers with an OPS plus of 126. Come playoff time, though, again, this is where Ryan Howard has stepped up so big for the Phillies so many times. And in game one, they're down early to the Cardinals. But it's Ryan Howard that steps up with 2 on, rips a 3-run homer that set the city ablaze. And, for me as a freshman at Temple, my first time watching a Phillies playoff run in Philadelphia, you could feel the electricity. It was undeniable. This team was a team of destiny, and surely they're going to go all the way this year. They're up 2-1 against the Cardinals, and they're about 9 outs away in Game 4 from going on, but Cardinals fight back at home. They force a Game 5, but Game 5 is fine. We have Roy Halladay at home. We have this clutch lineup that has been there so many times already. The vibes are fully positive going into this game. The Cards scratch one across in the first inning, but it's okay. We have 9 innings. Chris Carpenter is a good pitcher, but we're not worried about him. And the innings just keep going by, and it just stays 1-0. And the Phillies get a base runner here or there, but there's never really any danger. And it finally gets to the bottom of the 9th, and it's still 1-0. Chris Carpenter stays in, going for the complete game shutout to put the Cardinals to the NLCS. 2-hitter Shane Victorino gets out. 3-hitter Chase Utley gets out. And with 2 out in the bottom of the 9th, Ryan Howard steps to the plate. And as frustrating as this whole game has been, all he has to do is take advantage of one Chris Carpenter mistake and set the bank of frenzy. It's going to happen. The Phillies are surely going to go through. Ryan Howard rolls over on a ground ball to first base. And when it cuts to the field camera, I'm waiting to see him come in sprinting, trying desperately to get to first base. It's just an easy flip to the pitcher, steps on first base. Howard is not even in the picture coming down the line. And I remember watching at our dorm in 1300, immediately losing my shit. Why isn't Howard running that out? He quit. He gave up. And then they cut to a shot of him, and he's down on the ground, and he's holding his Achilles. And then they show the replay, and you can see not only his Achilles snap, he falls over. You then see him get back up, try to run again, fall. He even gets up a second time to try to run before he finally realizes, I'm going to get out. This is done. This is it. And of all the painful playoff losses that I've seen for all of my various Philadelphia teams that have come in a lot of different fashions, there is none that is more metaphorical for the ending of an era than the picture of Ryan Howard down on the ground holding his Achilles after that 2011 season. Because that is the last time. I didn't say the 2007 to 12, 13, 14 Phillies. 2011 is the last time that the Phillies made the playoffs until their most recent run in 22. If you look at the rest of Howard's career, it's amazing to me to think that from 2007 to 2011 was 5 years. It was, we're excluding the 05 Rookie of the Year and the 06 MVP, but 5 years of some of the best baseball that you will ever see a player have. He somehow
How are you excluding the MVP? Just make it one more year.
I
feel like you're artificially
Yeah, he's got a reason. He's got a reason.
Howard's
I'm trusting
here.
the storyteller.
I'm referring to that 5 years as the 5 years that the Phillies peaked, not the 5 years that Ryan Howard.
Okay.
Peak Howard is 05 to 09. And that is again a 5 year stretch. But whatever. I'm not too hung up on the 5 year thing. I'm just saying. From 2007 to 2011 is the 5 years that the Phillies are excelling. If you would have asked me how many years Ryan Howard played after that, I would probably say 2, maybe 3. He played 5 more years with the Phillies after that. None of them were very good. In 2012, he comes back halfway through the year from his Achilles injury, but he only hits 11 home runs. In those 5 seasons, only one of them did he hit better than 230 at the plate. He did not have a single season with an OPS over 100. And in 2014, his first fully healthy season back, he led the National League in strikeouts with 190. It was really, really not good for those 5 years. And the reason it was 5 years is because I believe it was just about 2-3 months before he ruptured his Achilles. Howard had signed a 5-year extension with the Phillies for $125 million. So they're pretty much stuck with him. It immediately became an albatross of a contract and something that the Phillies never recovered from during his tenure. But I will always remember 2016 was the final year of that contract. Phillies had a 3-game set with the Mets at home to finish out the season. And I wasn't living back in Philly yet from after college. I was still back home with my parents, but we had a Penn field hockey game that day that I came up to work. The game let out at 2 p.m. The Phillies had started at 1, and everybody knew it was Ryan Howard's last game. And I just had a hunch to check Phillies.com, see if there was still standing room. And sure enough, there was one. So I got a ticket, made it down by about the 5th or 6th inning, and got to see Ryan Howard's last at-bat as a Philly. It was a rolled over ground ball to first base. No torn Achilles this time.
It was going to be one of 2 things, and that was the more likely one.
Well, it also could have been a strikeout.
It could have. Yeah, it's true.
Could have been a strikeout on a slider from a lefty down low and away, which I think if there's 2 signature Ryan Howard plays, it's the majestic home run with the bat drop behind him and just absolutely like waving a tennis racket at a slider low and away. Those are the 2 Ryan Howard images, but this one was the third of those images, the rolled over ground ball to first base, into the shift, thrown out at first. When it came time for the top of the following inning, Howard went out, took ground balls, threw it. But then when they were set to start the inning, they sent in the replacement to get him. Ryan Howard's able to leave to a standing ovation, which was for me very nice to be able to witness, participate in. I teared up a little bit. I won't say that I didn't. But it was really nice to see him have that moment because in Philadelphia fan culture, obviously, Chase Utley was like the number one that everybody loved. Ryan Howard, very undeservedly, kind of became the punching bag, even when the Phillies were successful, for a lot of frustrations that fans have with the team. Why is he continuing to swing at these low breaking pitches and strike out in this way? Why does he continue to roll over? The classic boomer take of why doesn't he just lay a bunt down the third baseline once in a while and then they won't do it anymore? And certainly, while never overt, I would say never overt, but it is important to note, Chase Utley was beloved. Ryan Howard got a lot of shit. Jimmy Rollins got a lot of shit. Paul Hamels got a lot of shit too, but he was from California and he had long hair. So
he's a hippie, which is the only thing they hate worse than the other word that they won't say.
These things certainly code the way that players are received, even if it isn't conscious by certain people. But it was great to see in that moment, Ryan Howard did get the ovation that he deserved. And he became a free agent ostensibly after that. I think he only had a minor league offer from the Braves. He spent like maybe a month with them and then realized it wasn't working. He decided to retire. When we look back on the career of Ryan Howard, you can look at it in 2 ways. You can look at the peak or we can look at the whole. At his peak, Ryan Howard is truly the elite of the elite, the rookie of the year in 2005, a 2-time home run champion, a 1-time MVP in 2006. He is tied with Sammy Sosa for the career record for most 140 RBI seasons, with 3 such seasons. He's also tied with Sammy Sosa for the most career 130 RBI seasons, with 4 such seasons. From 2006 to 2009, he hit 198 home runs. But if you look back on his career as a whole, he's only a 3-time All-Star. He has 382 career home runs, which is a good number, but not the number you would expect from the guy who was the fastest to 100 career home runs and the guy who was the fastest to 200 career home runs. And for me, I can blame two things for why he's not in the Hall of Fame. First of all, that Achilles injury. He was starting to fall off a little bit before that, but he was still a 30 home run guy. He would have continued to be a 30 home run guy for the duration of that contract. It really can't be stated enough how devastating it was to both him and the team for him to blow out his Achilles. And secondarily, I would say Ryan Howard is one of the biggest reasons why we now have shift rules, and yet he did not get to benefit from them.
Mm-hmm.
If Ryan Howard played in the modern era with modern shift rules, he hits at least 280 every season, and by virtue of that, he's going to get less pitches that he's just going to roll over. He's going to get more to actually hit. We're going to see more home runs, and I think we would have easily seen Ryan Howard get to at least 500 career home runs and enter that surefire Hall of Fame status, if not for the Achilles, if not for the shift. I think if you eliminate those two things, we're talking about Ryan Howard as one of the all-time great power hitters, not just in Phillies history, but in the history of the game. He's not going to cry over spilled milk, though, and neither will I. And it's also important to note, the legacy of players is not just what they do on the field, it's what they leave behind. Ryan Howard, always very involved in the community in his time in Philadelphia. And he leaves behind the Ryan Howard Training Center, which is at 17th and Fitzwater in South Philadelphia. It is the same field that the older version of the Taney Dragons, you might remember, the Monet Davis-led Philadelphia team that went to the Little League World Series. This is where the Anderson Monarchs, which is the next level up for the Taney Dragons, this is where they train and where they play, as well as thousands of other children throughout the Philadelphia region. And look, I might play a little loose with the timeline because that center went up in 2016 and the Taney Dragons Monet Davis run was in 2014. But you cannot deny that Monet Davis eventually trained at the facility that bears Ryan Howard's name.
You just got to flip it. She trained at the facility that eventually had Ryan Howard's name.
Yes. Yeah, what Xavier said. That's the better way to say it. But yes, to your point, like that Taney Dragons team was delightful because you had Monet Davis, you had Zion Spearman, you had a player that I only remember as Lil Smokey because I only remember that his dad had a shirt that said Big Smokey. Truly a delightful team, and one that certainly looked up to players like Ryan Howard. It's one of the great what ifs for me, certainly in Phillies history, but I think if you look at it from a larger scale, baseball history, what if Ryan Howard never blew out his Achilles? What if the shift never was a thing? And look, he's an all-time great Philadelphia Philly. He is the big piece. And to me, he is the big guy. I think he is exactly what we're looking for with this category that I created. So I will now be able to arbitrarily come up with things that ding both of your guys because it's my category and it is the Ryan Howard category. But in all seriousness, love Ryan Howard.
That's the benefit of making the category because when we talked about Tim Anderson, I was kind of looking at limiting to like four to five like good seasons like total because Tim Anderson only had 3 or 4 good seasons and then within a couple of years is out of the league. So I had guys that had like 7, 8 good seasons, but then a precipitous trail off. I was like, oh, that's too much. It's too much. But since Diaz makes the category, Diaz gets to make the parameters.
The guys just have to fall off a cliff. I think that's if we sum it up,
yes.
sort of like the guy has to fall off a cliff. You can get to those heights different ways, but you have to be at heights and fall off a cliff. And Xavier, I want to know, who is it that you're pushing off a cliff?
So I'm going to bring my guy in a second, but real quick, Caitlin said I have to talk about this as well because I was down to 2 and ended up using my character clause to choose one. But the guy I didn't choose was Ty Lawson. Did you both know that Ty Lawson got kicked out of China for saying that Chinese women are caked up?
That's like a compliment.
I'm going to go so far as to say it's a compliment, but that's definitely not the worst thing that anyone's been kicked out of a country for.
He literally posted on Instagram, like at a club, talking about Chinese women being caked up and got fired for inappropriate social media posts And he talked about it later on, saying, I was trying to compliment them and they didn't understand it, but he got fired from his Chinese basketball team and kind of essentially kicked out of the country for complimenting Chinese women, which I thought was very funny. So, my only success this season has been on the ice. So let's go back there. And this time, let's talk about Jonathan Cheechoo.
Jonathan Cheechoo?
Yes.
That's not a Pokemon?
It's not a Pokemon.
Okay.
Jonathan Cheechoo was born July 15th, 1980. And he had a pretty unique path to the ice because he was born and raised in Moose Factory, Ontario.
No fucking way that's real.
Yes.
That's some shitty Canadian Adult Swim equivalent cartoon. That is not a real town.
So, Moose Factory is a small island on the southern end of James Bay, which is in the far northern parts of Canada, and is so far removed from everywhere else in Canada that, according to Google Maps, if you want to get to Ottawa from there, you'd have to take 28 hours of a mix of walking and 5 different buses. And that only works in the winter when the river splitting Moose Factory from the mainland is frozen over and you can drive a snowmobile over it. Moose Factory.
There's nothing to add. Like, you're looking at us to add something to that ridiculous statement that you just crafted.
What a fantastic Google Maps scenario where whether or not the river is frozen impacts your travel.
As you may expect from the name and his name, Moose Factory is home to members of the Moose Cree First Nation, a band of the Cree people, one of the largest First Nations groups in Canada. The island itself is like half reservation and half not, but most of the people there are Cree. When Cheechoo was younger, he liked hockey, but he wasn't really thinking about it being a career. He figured he would follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, who is a trapper and hunter. Even into his 70s, his grandfather George was heading out 30 kilometers every morning on a snowmobile at dawn to check his trap lines for beaver, otters, and partridge. He even considered being a minister like his dad, Mervyn, who George had sent to a religious school to give him other opportunities than just being a hunter and trapper. Most of Jonathan's youth hockey time was spent on small backyard ponds, traveling to games via snowmobile. A lot of times it was too cold to even play hockey because from December to February up in Moose Factory, it was regularly minus 10 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill that was significantly worse. And they had no indoor hockey facility. It wasn't until 1992, after bake sales, fundraising, and petitioning the provincial government, that they got a indoor hockey facility. The Cheechoo Arena, not named after him, named after a different Cheechoo because there are a ton of Cheechoos in Moose Factory. One article I saw said that it is the Moose Factory equivalent of the name Smith.
Also, I love that you started that list of things that built this factory with bake sales and ended with petitioning the government.
Yes, you have to raise a certain amount of money to get matching stuff from the government. And so they were literally doing bake sales to raise money.
I love that those two are equivalent things in this world.
But Cheechoo kept playing. He participated in the Little NHL, which is the Little Native Hockey League, the largest annual hockey tournament for First Nation youth in Ontario. Now it's up to over 200 teams and over 3,000 players competing. He was later inducted into the Little NHL Hall of Fame back in 2011 for their 40th anniversary. Really cool stuff for the Little NHL. Cheechoo was good, and he keeps developing into a strong hockey player. When he was 12, he wrote an essay on what he was going to be doing when he grew up, and his answer was that he was going to be an NHL player for the San Jose Sharks. The Sharks might be a weird team for a kid in, the northern reaches of Ontario living essentially on a reservation to choose, but his uncle had given him a Sharks jacket when he was little that he loved, and his favorite player in the NHL was Pat Falloon, who had just been drafted by the Sharks.
Who am I, a Vancouver fan on the east coast of the United States of America, to criticize anyone for what hockey team they choose to root for?
My bigger question, and I looked it up, so he was 10 years old when the Sharks came into existence.
Yeah,
That's
the hot, fresh new thing.
I was waiting for that to be the punchline of the statement. He said he was going to play for the San Jose Sharks, which is especially impressive because the Sharks didn't even exist for 3 years.
No, the Sharks had just come into existence, and I believe Pat Falloon was their first ever draft pick. It was either their expansion draft or their first NHL draft after they became an expansion team. but he loved Pat Falloon. Around the same time, he met Ted Nolan, a native Ojibwa, who had a lengthy playing career and coaching career, who saw a lot of potential in Jonathan. Later, Nolan said, I remember talking to the parents about, quote, you should get this kid out to a place where people can see him. Jonathan was essentially the pride of the entire town at this point. So everyone was chipping in money to help him continue on this path. At one point, they raised $4,000 to send him on a trip to Toronto for a youth tournament. So at the age of 14, with the possibility of a professional career, he had to leave home. So he moved south, about 200 miles to Timmins, a small city of about 40,000 people. Timmins isn't anything special. It's still over 3 hours from Sudbury, which is the largest city in northern Ontario, but it had more hockey players than Moose Factory and a real bantam league, so Jonathan could play against kids of his skill level. His uncle Doug was a counselor in Timmins to help native kids transition off the reservation to jobs in real places, and helped him find a sponsor family to stay with. His father, Mervyn, said, quote, it was really tough for the whole family. I remember him taking off for the first time on a plane, and we all sat there and waited for the plane to take off, and it did, and someone started crying, and we all started crying. It was pretty tough to see him go. And it wasn't just tough for them. Jonathan would cry himself to sleep at night and spend hours on the phone with his family. Later on, he would say, for a lot of players, it's tough to go from junior to the pros or from the minors to the NHL. For me, it was tough leaving Moose Factory for the first time. It was a totally different life than what I was used to. I phoned home every day. Lots of times I wanted to come home when I called, but by the time I hung up, I decided to stick it out. By the time he was 16, he was able to move to Kitchener, further south, near to Toronto, to play for the Kitchener Dutchmen in the MWJHL. Now a regular right winger, in just 43 games, he had 35 goals and 41 assists for a total of 76 points. Which is pretty good, not crazy for that age. If you're a true star around that time, you're looking at a 2-to-1 points to game ratio, or sometimes even more than that. But solid enough. And that attracted enough attention where he was drafted number 5 overall in the 1997 OHL draft by the Belleville Bulls. At this higher level of competition, he continued to put up some solid numbers. 76 points again, this time with 31 goals and 45 assists in 64 games. And now, in 1998, he's eligible for the NHL draft. 120 people from Moose Factory take a lengthy trip down to Buffalo for the draft. On draft night, the San Jose Sharks draft Jonathan Cheechoo in the second round, number 29 overall, after picking up an extra second rounder for swapping number 2 and number 3 with the Nashville Predators. There was a lot of excitement for Jonathan. Most teams and critics thought this was a terrible pick. I'll be honest on that. According to the CBC, some scouts say that he skated as fast going forward as some prospects did backwards.
Methodical.
I mean, it's one of those things where his development started so much later than most other high-level hockey prospects that he was just never considered a good skater. But
I think the Sharks were just excited that there was a prospect that said the Sharks were their favorite team.
They have him stay in the OHL for the next year, 98-99. At this point, he's kind of like a power forward, kind of in the Chris Kreider style, where it's a lot of banging off defensemen, using his body rather than trying to outskate or be more technically superior than the opposition. He has another solid season with Belleville, 82 points, 35 goals, 47 assists, 63 games. Really picks it up in the OHL playoffs. 21 games, he has 15 goals and 15 assists. We love symmetry. And in Game 7 of the J. Ross Robertson Cup Finals, against the London Knights, he has 5 goals, including a 14-minute third-period hat trick, as Belleville wins 9-2 for their first and only ever OHL championship. And you think, after a season like this, maybe he'd get some time with the Sharks. Sharks are really good at this point. This is in the period where they're making the playoffs every year. And so they say, we still want to give you another year of seasoning in the OHL. So 99-2000, he hit in 66 games, 91 points, which was 6th in the league, 102 penalty minutes, still pretty physical. So getting it done on both ends. But even after this, the Sharks still weren't ready to give him an NHL shot. They did assign him to their AHL affiliate, though, the Kentucky Thoroughblades. So far, he has never played outside of Canada, and they're sending him to Kentucky now. He plays pretty well, 75 games, 66 points, but is a healthy scratch in the playoffs for the most part, and they still want him to get more seasoning. And at this point, it's kind of a worry where it's like, this is 4 years post-draft. Like, is he ever going to play?
You can't just keep seasoning the meat. You do have to cook it eventually.
The Thoroughblades move to Cleveland, where they become the Cleveland Barons. So the next year, he's now in Cleveland, and he has 46 points in 53 games. And then finally, in the 2002-2003 season, the Sharks start off the season pretty badly. They're struggling. It's really tough for them. They've made the playoffs 5 years in a row. It doesn't look like they're going to make the playoffs this year. So they finally turn to their youth and call up the 22-year-old Jonathan Cheechoo. He only has 16 points that season, but he shows enough that he makes the Sharks roster heading into the 03-04 season. Playing alongside Mike Ricci and Scott Thornton, he was pretty productive, especially for, a second-year player. 28 goals, 19 assists in 81 games. Then he had 4 goals and 6 assists in 17 playoff games as the Sharks make it all the way to the conference finals before losing to Calgary 4-2. And then the lockout happens next season. So unable to really capitalize on that. He goes to Sweden briefly, plays with HV, but it's only 20 games, relatively unproductive. So now we get to 05-06. The Sharks, once again, struggle a little bit coming out of the gate, and then they swing for the fences. And they make a trade for Joe Thornton. Thornton had just signed a massive extension with Boston, but Boston was struggling and regretted it and were trying to shed salary. So they make this deal. Obviously, this goes down as one of the worst deals Boston has ever made, ever. Thornton, Sharks legend, 15 years there, surefire Hall of Famer. But one other effect of the trade is that he was a catalyst for Cheechoo to really up his game. Playing off the wing for Thornton, Cheechoo's production skyrockets. Again, as a reminder, in 03-04, he has 28 goals, 19 assists. Prior to the Thornton trade in this 05-06 season, he has 15 points, 7 goals, and 8 assists in 24 games. In the 57 games after the trade, Cheechoo has 78 points, 49 goals, 29 assists, for a total of 56 goals and 37 assists and 93 points. With this, he becomes the first Sharks player to win the Maurice Rocket Richard Trophy, and the third native player to score more than 50 goals in a season after Reggie Leach and Brian Trottier. He leads the league with 11 game-winning goals, second with 24 power play goals. He had 5 hat tricks, including one in the last game of the season, to ensure that he finished ahead of Jaromir Jagr for the Richard Trophy. He was the first player to have 5 or more hat tricks since Mario Lemieux in 95-96. This is an absolutely incredible season. The Sharks fall to the Oilers in the Western Conference semis, but with Thornton, Cheechoo, and Patrick Marleau, they have a really strong core to build around. So after the season, they signed Cheechoo to a 5-year extension worth $15 million, which for hockey terms at that time was pretty significant. They also signed Mark Bell to put on the left wing because they think that he would work well with Joe Thornton and Cheechoo. That part's a disaster. Bell gets arrested for DUI and hit and run prior to training camp and was so bad that the Sharks have to just bench him and kind of get rid of him by the end of the season. And his bad play impacted Thornton and Cheechoo for a little bit, but thankfully the Sharks then moved Milan Mihajlovic up to the top line, and Cheechoo picks it up again. So after a somewhat slow start, he still ends up with 69 points.
Nice.
On 37 goals and 32 assists, and makes the All-Star game. Sharks had another disappointing conference semis loss to the Red Wings. If you know the Sharks, you know that they lose in the playoffs. It's what they do. So rather than me saying that they're going to lose in the playoffs again, just know that they lose in the playoffs. But optimism is still there for the team. Unfortunately, Cheechoo was really banged up in the playoffs and ended up needing double hernia surgery once the season was over. This really messed with his offseason preparations, and in 07-08, he struggled. He only played 69 games and scored just 37 points on 23 goals and 14 assists.
Not particularly nice.
His production drops further the following season, where he scores just 12 goals. And then on September 12th, 2009, he gets traded by the Sharks along with Mihalik and a second-round pick to the Ottawa Senators in exchange for Danny Heatley. After just 61 games and only 14 points, the Senators put him on waivers. He clears waivers and gets sent to the Senators' AHL affiliate, and then gets recalled for the playoffs, where he plays in one single game against the Pittsburgh Penguins. And then they buy him out of the last year of that original extension that he made with the Sharks, making him a free agent. And this was the last time Cheechoo played in the NHL. 4 years after he led the league in scoring, and still only 30 years old, he does sign with the Sharks' AHL affiliate, the Worcester Sharks. I can't say that word. Worcester Sharks, who they were coached by his previous coach with the Kentucky Thoroughblades, Ray Sommer. And he has 47 points, 55 games, which isn't bad. So the year after that, he signs a two-way contract with the Blues. But he only spends the year with Peoria and doesn't make the ice for the Blues. And then, just when it looks like he might get another contract, another chance, another lockout, 2012-2013 lockout. Halfway through the season, when things start picking up again, he signs with the Oklahoma City Barons of the AHL, and in 35 games, he scores 32 points. And after that, he leaves North America. On July 10, 2013, he signed a one-year contract with Medvashik Zagreb of the KHL. And he goes on to spend 4 years in the KHL for 3 different teams, but somehow never for an actual Russian team. He plays for Zagreb, Minsk, and Bratislava, playing 217 games, scoring 164 points, and making the KHL All-Star team 3 different times, once for each team. But he has a young son at this point. So on March 6, 2018, at the age of 37, in nearly 8 years since his last actual NHL game, Cheechoo officially retires. Later that month, he gets honored by the Sharks, big ceremony against Calgary. In total, he played 501 regular season games, scored 170 goals, had 135 assists. He still holds the Sharks record for goals in a season with 56, power play goals, 24, hat tricks in a season with 5, and career hat tricks with 9. No one has even gotten within 10 goals of his single season record for the Sharks since he left San Jose. Like, the next highest is 44. So there's a good chance that he's going to have this record for decades to come. And, after that, it's really kind of just working to help Native hockey. He's been honorary chairman for the Little NHL. He's worked on developing youth academies for First Nations hockey players, and kind of like more nondescript stuff like that. It's been important for the youth there because it's kind of hard to discuss his impact as a non-native person, but I'll just use a quote from Ted Nolan. "What Wayne Gretzky is to Canada is what Cheechoo is to us." Kind of hard to get higher praise than that.
The Wayne Gretzky of Moose Factory.
He's the Wayne Gretzky of all First Nations people, not just Moose Factory.
He's lucky Carey Price is a goalie then, but okay.
You know what? Carey Price, great player. Goalies don't get that due. Wayne Gretzky's not a goalie.
I know. They're not as exciting.
But
let's see the pretty face behind the mask.
But that's Jonathan Cheechoo, the Moose Factory native who burst onto the scene, had a great couple of years, and as quickly as you saw him, he was out of the league entirely.
Enjoyed that. I really like Cheechoo. I think that's it's a steep ass cliff. It's almost like a mesa because it's really, really flat for a long time. One spike and then right back down. Not so much a cliff because it's not like he's falling off any gentle slope. Just gotta climb this wall real quick.
Yeah, it's a mesa. That's a good way to put it because I think he had 3 good seasons, like one incredible season, one all-star season, and another like very good season, and that's about it. But so, James, we have another person that we have to talk about.
We have another, and I want to start by real quick seeing if you guys can help me talk about a group of 8 guys. Can you try and help me name the 8 top players in the NFL for the 2010 regular season in yards from scrimmage?
Chris Johnson.
Chris Johnson is not in there.
Oh,
2010,
care
Adrian
anymore.
Peterson.
Adrian Peterson is the bottom of these 8. All 8 of these have at least 1,600 yards, and Adrian Peterson is the 8th.
Thomas Jones?
Nope.
Priest Holmes?
Nope. So, okay, we got a Texan at the top. Anyone want to take the Texan?
That's too early for Arian.
AJ?
Arian Foster?
It is Arian Foster. We have someone from Kansas City in number 2.
Larry Johnson.
No, we're looking for Jamal Charles. It's a
Charles
Raven
then, yes, right.
coming in at 3 in 2010.
Ray Rice.
Ray Rice, correct. Diaz, do you know the Eagle in 2010?
Shady, baby.
Yes, indeed. We've got a Raider. Anyone?
Raider. Darren McFadden.
Darren McFadden, yes, and a Jaguar.
Not Maurice Jones-Drew.
Maurice Jones-Drew. So we've got them. We've got Adrian Peterson, and we do have an 8th guy. He's number 6, but he's number 1 in my heart today. It's Cleveland Browns' Peyton Hillis.
Oh, baby.
So if you're going to talk about Peyton Hillis, you need to start in Conway, Arkansas. It's a little town north of Little Rock. It's where he was born to Carrie and Doug Hillis on January 21st, 1986. Supposedly, this is reported by Bleacher Report, and everything just kind of cites this one Bleacher Report thing. He's named for Walter Payton, an all-time great running back. Now, there is the whole thing where Peyton for Walter Payton and Peyton Hillis are spelled differently. I don't know if that's just a white people fucking up a name thing, or if this is just a load of hooey, but he's possibly named for Walter Payton, and he does take to sports, very much like his supposed namesake at Conway High School.
He is named for Walter Payton. They just don't want to disrespect Walter Payton by insinuating that he is as good as the true Payton. So he's like a cheap knockoff Payton. You know, all the fast food restaurants in Asian countries where it's not McDonald's, it's Mac Arnold's, but
it's
the Arches. It's the Arches.
I mean, I don't want to disrespect Peyton Hillis here, though, because in high school, he is a star. He's playing both third base and running back in baseball and football, and is one of the best athletes in the state of Arkansas. However, he does have a kind of atypical body type for both of those, because he is a built little dude. The earliest measurement I could get for him is when he makes Parade's All-American team in February 2004 as one of 9 running backs that year, including Adrian Peterson, for what it's worth. He is already at this point 6'1" and 245 pounds. That's 25 pounds heavier than the next biggest. And most of these guys are 190, 195. He is built like a bull compared to the rest of these dudes. So clearly as he's being scouted for college, a lot of people aren't necessarily thinking running back for him long term, but with all of this pedigree as one of the best high school athletes in Arkansas, he's still getting a lot of love. He's getting a lot of offers from Big 12 schools and SEC schools in the area, but in the end, he's going to end up staying pretty close to home. He joins the Arkansas Razorbacks. The Razorbacks at the time are coached by a man named Houston Nutt, 2 T's. He shifts him to more of a fullback and blocking role, and he is an absolute tech in this position. Gets still some personal stats, 337 yards from scrimmage that first year with the team, and leads the team with 8 touchdowns. He also does some work with kick returns during this time. He's going to be like a Swiss Army knife his whole time in college. He will line up at one point or another at fullback, halfback, tailback, tight end, wide receiver, punt returner, kick returner, and he will block on special teams as well. Even the next season, when another one of those guys from 2010, Darren McFadden, comes into town and he takes hold of the starting reign, Hillis still has a very, very clear role other than just clearing reins for McFadden. He's 3rd in the team, yards for scrimmage this year with 717, 2nd on the team with 7 touchdowns, and 2nd on the team in receiving yards with 402. I will say, though, that might be an indictment of the Razorbacks, who do follow up the previous year's 5-6 record with a 4-7 record in 2005. But that starts to change the next year. One thing that we get for the first time at the beginning of this next season is injuries kind of serving as a fullback for Peyton Hillis, in that they clear some lanes and opportunities for him, much as he does for many players on the field. At the beginning of the season, Darren McFadden, he's coming off of surgery. He is going to be healthy, but he ends up not being ready for their week 1 against Missouri State, a non-major. So Peyton Hillis gets to step in.
The pride of Ryan Howard, Missouri State. Or Ryan Howard is the pride of Missouri State.
The pride of... Okay, there we go. I don't know if Ryan Howard was watching this game. Let's see. No, he's a Philly. He's watching this from the Phillies dugout. And he is watching, by the way, as Peyton Hillis fucking trounces them. 135 yards, 3 touchdowns. It is Arkansas's best combined rushing output in 30 years.
Arkansas has 3 NFL running backs at this point. They should be doing that. Don't forget about Felix Jones.
Well, this is the first season that they do finally put together a winning season with this rushing attack. Darren McFadden is phenomenal as he comes back into this. The team loses in week 1 to USC while they're still kind of getting the offense gelling with this late addition and everything. But then they go on a 10-game win streak and find themselves at 10-1 as they enter the final week of the regular season. Then they lose to number 9 LSU, but that's okay. That's okay. 10-2, that's good enough for a spot in the SEC title game. Where they lose to number 4 Florida, but that's okay. That's okay. You still have a good enough record for a spot in the Capital One Bowl that they lose to number 6 ranked Wisconsin. So about as bad as those last 3 weeks could possibly go, but it is a phenomenal season nonetheless for All-American and SEC Offensive Player of the Year, Darren McFadden, who leads the conference with 1,647 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns, all thanks, I would argue, to the hard work in the trenches by the guy leading the way for him every single time, Peyton Hillis, who is the top-ranked fullback in the country this year. The next season, Darren McFadden again wins All-American honors, again wins SEC Offensive Player of the Year, all once again behind Peyton Hillis and the hard work that he is doing clearing real estate for McFadden to become the program's all-time leading rusher. Hillis himself has a college career best 884 yards from scrimmage to finish his college career altogether with 2,624, 470 return yards at the same time, and altogether 23 touchdowns. Pretty fucking good for a fullback going through here college. Now, the production relative to the position, it's there. The pedigree and the reputation amongst coaches and teammates, it's there. But what isn't there really are the measurables for him. Doesn't do that much at the combine itself. He only has the Arkansas Pro Day 40 for people to go by. And he only runs a 4.57 40-yard dash in that, which everyone just decides, okay, this dude's pretty big. He can't really cut left or right. He is a straight north-south runner. 4.57 is just not going to cut it. It also doesn't help that the 2008 NFL draft, as he's entering, it is incredibly deep at the halfback positions. 10 players in this draft will have 1,000-yard seasons at one time or another. You do have Chris Johnson in this, going back to that earlier. We've got Jamal Charles. We've got Ray Rice. We've got guys like Matt Forte. We have his teammate, Darren McFadden. And then at fullback, you do also have a future Pro Bowler in Jerome Felton, and you have a combine stud, Owen Schmidt, compared to the very poor measurables that someone like Peyton Hillis had put up this.
And Felix Jones.
I'm trying to not just, again, spend 12 minutes naming guys. It's a phenomenal team.
I'm just saying there were 3 Arkansas running backs drafted in one draft. 2 in the first round. How often do you have 2 running backs from the same team drafted in the first round?
It's not the first round for Hillis. It is the 7th and final round. Denver uses their last pick, 227 overall. That is when he becomes, like you said, the 3rd halfback. We should say he is drafted as a fullback. So the 3rd halfback that comes off the board for Arkansas this season, and he's going to become a Bronco. This is the kind of guy that 2008 Denver blog heads were absolutely losing their mind over in a complimentary fashion. This is kind of why I was thinking about draft write-ups on blog guys, because I read through a lot of them for Peyton Hillis, kind of wondering what the temperature was. They think this is a sneaky best pick of the draft. They're saying if they can figure out how to use him, you've got an absolute stud here. But the refrain of if you can figure out how to use him has already been the Peyton Hillis story and will kind of continue to be the Peyton Hillis story. Very first game with Denver, 14 yards on 3 attempts, 1 reception on 2 targets. It's a 4-yard gain. Denver beats Oakland 41-14. They don't need him all that much for this. Maybe it's a modest start. He exclusively blocks then all the way through the bye week. He does not take another snap on offense. He is just doing special teams and blocking until they've finished their week 8 bye. And during that bye, they've had to, kind of restructure the playbook around some injuries, which once again are the fallback of life for Peyton Hillis. Coming out in week 9 against the Dolphins, he links up with quarterback Jay Cutler 7 times on 9 targets for 116 yards. And this is again, partially due to playtime opening, but out of nowhere, he just posts a 100-yard receiving game in his second one having any kind of real offensive stats whatsoever. After that, the next 5 weeks, he continues to get more and more folded into the ground game. He's going to average 65 total yards per game and 5 total touchdowns in that time as the Broncos go 4-1. They're at the cusp of playoffs, almost there. But then eventually in these 5 games, Hillis gets injured. And with him on the IR, Denver loses all 3 games. I think that speaks as much as anything to the importance of him to this roster. They do end up having him as their leading rusher for the season with 343 yards. But this is similar to when he was the second leading receiver for Arkansas, where if 343 rushing yards is going to lead the team, that's kind of more an indictment of the team than anything else. But there's a big difference with the 2009 season versus the 2008 season, and that is who is coaching the team. Mike Shanahan was fired after that 8-8 finish the year before, and in has come Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels has a new scheme. In order to fill that scheme, he has drafted Knowshon Moreno and signed Cornell Buckhalter. Correll Buckhalter.
Eagles legend Brian Westbrook backup who tore his ACL, I think 3 years in a row.
Oh my God.
It was each summer. It was like Correll Buckhalter looks great. Correll Buckhalter tore his ACL, but he did finally have a couple of healthy seasons. Good. I'm glad he gets a crossover into this episode.
He is healthy enough to basically continue pushing Hillis down the depth chart along with Knowshon Moreno. So he's got that going for him. Hillis totals 73 yards from scrimmage. Not per game. He totals 73 yards from scrimmage that season entirely. He was in 14 games this season. The previous year had risen up to the rank of fullback 1. He's been their leading rusher all the way down to 73 total yards. It is just clear for him like there is no place in Denver. It's not going to happen. The front office recognizes that. Josh McDaniels doesn't want this player. And so that offseason, he's traded in March with a 6th-round pick for Brady Quinn. And it becomes a Cleveland Brown under head coach Eric Mangini.
The man genius.
The man genius who is coming off a 5-11 2009, unfortunately. And due to injuries the previous year, it had been like a running back by committee. You'd had Jerome Harrison, you had Chris Jennings, you had Ravens legend Jamal Lewis, all totaling at least 200 yards. Harrison and Jennings are coming back. They've also got James Davis and Montario Hardesty sharing preseason snaps with Hillis. And at first it seems like, again, he's just going to kind of get pushed down into depth chart obscurity. But the fullbacks of life, injuries come through one last time for him. And after the first 2 weeks, like being involved, he puts up 126 total yards from scrimmage. His first real opportunity to become like a starting running back for a Cleveland Browns team is going to be a very challenging one. Week 3 of this season, he is going to have to square off in Baltimore against the Ravens. The year prior to this, Baltimore had just seen one of their 3 streaks in franchise history of 39 or more weeks not allowing a 100-yard rusher, by a wide margin, the most that any franchise has of such streaks. This is, suffice to say, like a stout run defense historically, and this is what Peyton Hillis is up against. I don't know if it is something about Peyton Hillis' style, specifically to running backs, in that it is such a departure. There are no clever cuts. He is not sprinting past defenders. He is not juking anyone out of their shoes. He is not evading tackle. Peyton Hillis is just leaning in and hitting the truck stick every single time a defender comes up to him, daring them to stop his forward progress. He piles up 144 yards on the day against the Baltimore Ravens, 36 through the air. All of this is still not enough to beat the Ravens. They win 24-17. But Peyton Hillis is one of the most impressive rushing performances in a decade against the Baltimore Ravens in this game. In his first real chance starting with the Cleveland Browns as more than just a gadget player. That is one of 5 100-yard rushing performances as he becomes the clear number 1 running back down the stretch for this team. I just want to highlight one more, and that is his 184 career best and a 34-14 win this time over the New England Patriots. Like a good Patriots team. He fucking massacres them. Another 36 receiving. So he puts up over 200 yards against the Pats in this.
And what makes that so much better is, Bill Belichick is the exact kind of coach that just fucking wishes he had a fullback that can go for 100 yards. Like that is the stuff. That and like a converted lacrosse player who is an elite gunner on special teams are the 2 favorite things for Bill Belichick.
Altogether on the season, Peyton Hillis finishes with 1,177 rushing yards, 477 receiving, and 13 total touchdowns for a total of 1,654 yards for scrimmage, placing him, as we mentioned earlier, 6th overall. He doesn't make the Pro Bowl. There are 3 spots for the AFC, and I will say, like, Arian Foster and Jamal Charles this year, easy choices. Like, that's the 1 and 2, no question. Maybe he should have pushed Maurice Jones-Drew. I think that's a personal preference thing. I admittedly, going back in time, would probably go with MJD, but that's really the spot that he had to get into the Pro Bowl if there was a spot for him. Doesn't make it, and the Browns finished 5-11 for the 2nd straight year, so it's not like he's going to get to play in any games after the regular season. But he is not concerned with any playoff brackets, because at this point, Peyton Hillis gets involved in a different bracket, and this is the one that I think we all are forever really going to remember him for. EA Sports decides that Madden NFL 12, the video game, will, rather than having the company pick the cover athlete, for the first time ever put it to a fan vote. There are 32 teams, and so that's going to make a perfect 5-round bracket if you select one player from each team, which they do. Standing in for Cleveland is Peyton Hillis. He gets an 8 seed, and in his first round, similar to his first real opportunity as a Brown, he is facing off against Baltimore, who are represented by number 7 seed Ray Rice. The Browns organization and the fans, not having a whole lot to do, what with them being the Cleveland Browns, they mobilize online in a very big way. Facebook and Twitter campaigns here in 2011, where this is still a relatively novel thing to be doing, just absolutely catapult him in terms of voter turnout. So he crushes Ray Rice in this first one, gets through the next round. He's up against number 2 seed Matt Ryan, representing the Atlanta Falcons. And once again, the Cleveland faithful, they come through. They push him on to the 3rd round. He's facing one of those illustrious 8 running backs that I keep mentioning, Jamal Charles this time for Kansas City. At this point, the online campaign is like a Hillis run. It is just a bowling ball plowing through obstacles one after the other. In the Final Four, he matches up against the number 1 seed on his side of the bracket, the reigning Super Bowl MVP at the time, Green Bay's Aaron Rodgers. Just becomes yet another bump in the road for Peyton Hillis as he trucks on through all the way to the championship round. Do you guys know who he faced off against in the championship round?
Was it Marshawn?
It was not Marshawn Lynch. It's a good guess, but it's not Marshawn Lynch. It is another player who, if they had been successful, would have become the first ever 2-time cover athlete. I don't know. It is the Philadelphia Eagles representative, Diaz, one last chance, Michael Vick.
Mike Vick? Yeah, Mike Vick, I was going to say.
Yep. And he's also getting on Twitter. He is also trying to get it, but to put in perspective what a fucking blowout this is, 13 million votes are cast in this tournament as a whole, across all the rounds, across all the different matchups. Over 1 million of those are cast in the championship matchup between Philadelphia Eagles' Mike Vick and Cleveland Browns' Peyton Hillis. 2/3 of them go to Peyton Hillis. That is more votes cast than most of the matchups combined were able to reach. Cleveland just cannot be stopped. They will Peyton Hillis to the cover of Madden, becoming the first Cleveland Brown to be on there, the first ever player not to be a Pro Bowler, and, it should be noted, the first ever fan-voted cover athlete. Maybe that is why he's the last ever fan-voted cover athlete. We can, certainly make that connection, but regardless, Peyton Hillis makes it on the cover of Madden NFL 12. Now, we're talking cliffs. That is the highlight of Peyton Hillis' career. The next season, he deals with a couple different things. He gets a case of strep throat, and then multiple hamstring injuries. He's still the Browns' rushing leader, but that's with 477 yards. So it's back to just being like, I guess you're the rushing leader by default. Contract expires, and he says, I am happy here in Cleveland, which is a statement that I feel like Cleveland Browns organization has scoffed at in recent years also. And he's willing to get the hometown discount, but Cleveland does not offer him any kind of contract at all. So he becomes a free agent. He signs with Kansas City. He has 1 year there. He has 2 injury-plagued years with the New York Football Giants. All 4 of these seasons, the one with Cleveland, the one with KC, and the 2 with New York, do not together total as many yards from scrimmage as he had in that magical 2010. After this last year with New York, after the series of injuries that he has had, consults with doctors, consults about his history of concussions, and he decides to hang it up. Says 7 years has been enough. He does not have the sufficient passion to continue putting his life on the line. And so he retires with almost half of his career 3,882 yards from scrimmage coming in just that one season, 2010. Peyton Hillis is a pretty private guy. There's not a lot about his early life, and there's not too much about his life afterwards, but there are two things I'd like to share real quickly from his post-playing career. He met his second wife, to whom, as far as I can tell now, he is still married, while shooting a horror movie for a buddy of his that came out in 2021 called The Hunting, where he plays two characters who are identical twins. And those characters' names are Connor Ryan and Matt Ryan, who was also in the 2008 draft, along with our boy Peyton Hillis, and many other people, Ray Rice, Joe Flacco. 2008 draft, one of the greatest of all time, as far as I'm concerned. More recently, in January 2023, he and his family, they're swimming in the Pensacola area of Florida, and he notices his son and niece start drowning. So jumps in to save them and does successfully pull them both out of the water. He himself nearly dies and has to be airlifted by helicopter to a nearby hospital. But based on all reports since then, he does seem to be making a full recovery. To kind of sum up why I selected this guy in the first place and to try and put a bow on all this, I picked Hillis because with the recent, and I say recent both as a couple years with Sean Watson and then a couple weeks where he has continued to show that he is one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, the Cleveland Browns organization burned a lot of goodwill. Because prior to that, there was something about the Browns fans and Cleveland, and I think them separate from the org, by and large, they're very easy to root for. They have this ability that I, as a division rival of them, have seen for many years. Despite all evidence to the contrary for there to be any hope, they just keep finding it. Despite how futile it may seem, they continue to, when a bright spot appears, believe that it is the beginning of something good, rather than some teams that are put upon, who, when something good happens, often wait for the other shoe to drop and for it to be destroyed. I think there's something beautiful in the fact that when something in Cleveland seems to catch fire, they are able to put all of their faith in that. And I think nothing demonstrates that more than this big, just lug of a dude. They see him as a fucking star, and they go all into making sure that not just Cleveland and not just the AFC North, not just the AFC, not just the football world, anyone who buys a copy of Madden is going to know that to them, Peyton Hillis is a fucking star. And they pushed to put him in a place that has made him incredibly easy for all of us to remember as the years go by. That emotion that a player can engender with a fan base. That's, I think, the ultimate mark of a guy to me, because it is a chance of a story to connect with fans. And so that is why my guy who fell off a cliff is Peyton Hillis.
It is quite a career. As Xavier, I'll say it for you. For there to be 3 NFL running backs on one team at the same time, and it's not just a thing where it's like, oh, well, this guy's a freshman and like he's going to redshirt this year. But technically, like, no, this was 3 NFL quality running backs all getting serious burn at the same time for Arkansas. Really, my takeaway is Houston Nutt must be one of the worst coaches of all time. I mean, you have 3 of them, bro.
So they make a bowl game each of those last 2 years. They lose the bowl game both times, but they do make a bowl game each of those last 2 seasons.
Yeah, but when you have 3,000 yards in the ground, you should be doing better than that. Like, your floor should be so much higher than just the bowl game. But, I mean, SEC is what it is.
What it is now is a difficult decision between 3 guys. And Xavier, you and I find ourselves in an interesting position because since the category is essentially, as I've heard it described by Diaz, who's the most Ryan Howard guy, it feels like he's pretty locked in. So we just have to decide if there's anyone the 2 of us think is more Ryan Howard than Ryan Howard.
The category this week is guys who hit a lot of home runs and also have a character in The Office named after them.
Hey, like slap shots and goals are similar enough to home runs, but no, I don't want to disparage anybody in making my own case for Jonathan Cheechoo. But if we're talking about guys who fell off, Ryan Howard had a lengthy career that was very good. and then he got hurt and had a slow descent to not being great. But he had 7 really good years, including an MVP season and a Rookie of the Year, and then was below replacement level for 5 years. That's going up to the top of the mountain, staying there for a while, and then a slow fall down, like, in my opinion, because I think Ryan Howard's a really good player. And with Peyton Hillis, it's more of like, I went up the mountain and then immediately slid down, in that there is one great season. It's not like he had some bad seasons, then good seasons, then great season, then good season. It's one incredible season, and essentially John Scott-like cult hero status, where because fans get to vote and make stupid decisions, he became more famous than he otherwise would have been. Running backs have the highest level of, hey, yeah, that running back had one great season. It happens all the time. It's the most common position for that to happen, because all it takes is one injury, and then a backup has a great year, and then they're back to being a backup the next year, or they get signed as a free agent thinking that a team's like, oh, we can have them start, and then it doesn't work out. So we could probably name 10 running backs right now that had one incredible season and nothing for the rest of it.
You did a very good job of sticking to not disparaging the guys on this. Well done.
It's not the guys. It's talking about the years of how they went.
No, and I want to push back on that a little bit, because I want to say, like, look at immediately the chance that he gets to be like a cog in the Denver offense in one season with the coach that like was part of him getting drafted, and he's fucking phenomenal for 5 games. You look at then him just getting ignored by a coach the next season, and then once again, as soon as he gets a shot, he's fucking phenomenal. And the year after that, he's pretty good, except for having strep throat and 2 hamstring injuries. And yeah, then he falls off at that point. But I think that's also discounting, because we took a good amount of time talking about the minors career of Cheechoo, which was significantly longer than one might expect it to be in this case. Like, as we were saying, it's a very long slope. If we're treating college as the minors, you've got one of the most productive fullbacks in the nation during that whole time who's not putting up yards because he isn't a running back. He's just not getting played at that position. Look, this is not me saying that Peyton Hillis has to be the guy. I'm just going to push back on you, like, slandering Peyton Hillis in this fashion.
I'm not slandering Peyton Hillis other than the John Scott thing, in that I think
John Scott's
we know that when you say that, you are slandering. Yeah, like, I don't think that's slander, but I understand that that's you. We know that when you say someone is a John Scott-like, that is an insult.
No, what I'm saying in that case is that Peyton Hillis had a career that dozens and dozens and dozens of running backs have, but because of the fan vote for that 1 year of Madden, it became, like, mythical.
Yeah.
But if we're taking a step back and looking at guys who fell off and like looking at the career and trying to fit what Diaz was looking for, other than Ryan Howard, because we can't obviously choose Ryan Howard for ourselves, making that mountain and then the fall off, of the two, Cheechoo fits that better than Peyton Hillis, which is the one great year and nothing else other than that. Like, when I was looking at this, like I said, I was thinking, because we talked about Tim Anderson as kind of the inspiration for this, I was looking at 3 to 4 years of solid production and then out of the league within 3 or 4 years from there. That's where I think Cheechoo fits the best in that. Again, because I think Ryan Howard, like, he's not going to make the Hall of Fame because DH and, you know, the injuries. Ryan Howard had a really lengthy and good career.
I just want to say how brutal it is for Ryan Howard that we just referred to him as a DH, despite the fact that I don't think he ever played the position full time because it wasn't universal yet.
It's close enough.
That's another point in my argument of like, if Ryan Howard came around 20 years later, he is like a multiple time MVP. If he's a DH and he doesn't have to play the field, he doesn't blow out his Achilles. Really, like, my thing in bringing up Ryan Howard is, like, Xavier, you're saying, like, he was a very good player. And, like, my point in bringing him up is, like, he was an all-time elite player. The seasons that Ryan Howard was having at his peak, I'll put them up there against any season that any player's ever had. Like, when we're talking 58 homers, hitting 313 and an OPS well over 1, and 150 RBI. We're talking about one of the most productive seasons that a player has ever had.
I think you're looking at that through rose-colored glasses.
No, he's fair to say that at the plate, that is one of those seasons.
His highest OPS plus ever was 167, which wouldn't have made the top 5 this year, and he never got over 145 again. Like, he was a great slugger, contributed nothing else, but was a cult figure in Philadelphia, had a long career, and never has to buy a drink in this city again.
Cult figure, I don't know if I necessarily agree with. Like, again, like
every member of that World Series team does not have to buy a drink in Philadelphia.
That's totally fair. But again, we're talking about tied for the most 140 RBI seasons in NL history, tied for the most 130 RBI seasons in NL history. The first 200 homers, the first 200 homers. Like, I'm just gonna push back on the like, oh, he was like a very good slugger. Like, no, he was an all-time slugger through 200 career home runs, and then he tore his Achilles.
If I may also, I'm gonna try real hard here to say the things that I like the most about each of your two guys, because I'm not gonna fight any longer for football John Scott. Ryan Howard, one of, I think, the best 3 examples of the true albatross first baseman contracts, the other 2 being Albert Pujols and Chris Davis. Like, those 3 contracts overshadowed the players, maybe even more than Bobby Bonilla's contract has overshadowed him. Like, the entire conversation about those 3 players became the amount of money they were being paid to be bad at baseball. And Albert Pujols is going to have some kind of distinction in there because he is the best of those 3 on a career basis, and also like has a little bit of a resurgence there at the M of St. Louis. With Chris Davis, he is going to get some distinction because it is just the worst of those 3, objectively. And then in the middle, you have Ryan Howard. And anytime we have someone that's like in this distinguished group and is kind of the middle child of that, there's something very Guy-like to that. With Cheechoo, I think Jonathan Cheechoo is set up the best to be like someone that is randomly remembered, because you've got a guy who has such a brief career that might not be that well known outside of San Jose, might not be that well known in San Jose, who nonetheless has a franchise record that's going to come up pretty close to the top of the page every single time you're looking at Sharks franchise records. And when I say those 2 out loud, I think it does take me a little closer to Jonathan Cheechoo over Ryan Howard. But at the same time, this is still the Ryan Howard category, and that presents a real difficulty.
That sets a terrible precedent going forward if we do that, where everyone who picks the category just can decide mid-episode, actually, this is my category.
I will go on the record right now that if I win this week, our category next week will be guys nominated by Diaz. You can both present, but if you don't meet that inherent qualification, it's going to be pretty tough to win.
Now this is similar to what we have to do next month, where we vote as to whether or not we ever have an election again. I haven't been.
I withdraw that threat, but what I will say is I will not disagree with the characterization that Jonathan Cheechoo is the better guy in terms of like Ryan Howard, a little more notoriety. I just really need to push back on the Ryan Howard was just your standard fair, like, great.
Diaz,
player.
You and I are in agreement on that. Like, Ryan Howard was a fucking problem. And I'm sure that there are numbers that say he was not as much of a problem as he seemed to us. I don't dispute that. There are many numbers, and many times I like to use those numbers for arguments. And other times I'm like, I don't know, man, I saw Ryan Howard bat, and he was pretty fucking good.
It's the curve argument. That's where we're at right now with the curve argument.
We each occupy a distinct space of the bell curve, and it's pretty consistent, I feel like, where we all have landed.
I am a proud brain drooler who still arrives at the right take. I am very proudly that.
Because you're also a happy side of bus looker outer most of the time. So there you go.
Almost every time. Let's
just describe some more visual memes here on the show instead of making a decision. No, I need to be decisive here if this is indeed coming down to me. Pains me, because I think that the advocate for this individual has made a lot of untrue statements about both of the other 2 candidates. I'm not going to lie. I think there's been like a lot of mistruths and fake news put out there. However, if I'm to look beyond their advocate and solely evaluate the candidates, I do think I have to hand it to Jonathan Cheechoo.
I appreciate that. Jonathan Cheechoo appreciates it. Maybe it's the lawyer in me where I have to be a zealous advocate for my client.
I just love how you said, I'm not going to disparage these two guys, and then spent 10 minutes disparaging them.
Hey. If you play the tape back, my start was Ryan Howard, I think, had an incredible career that was very lengthy, so I didn't think it fit. That was my Ryan Howard argument. My Peyton Hillis argument
because the initial take fit into it, we don't have to pay attention to the subsequent takes.
Well, to be fair, I jumped back in after being attacked on that, but this is neither here nor there, because we have someone to welcome to the Hall of Guy, and it's not who Diaz wanted to bring in, but Diaz, please do the honors anyway.
I mean, look, to my best knowledge, there is no character in The Office known as Jonathan Cheechoo, but perhaps, it could have been a background character. Maybe there's some passing lore. Perhaps there was a member of the native tribe who came in as a zealous advocate. Maybe it wasn't the Moose Factory. Maybe they had changed the name for, to avoid copyright purposes within the Office universe. There's a lot of ways that it could have slipped past us, but one way or another, all that matters is that Jonathan Cheechoo did have that one glorious season in which he set so many Sharks records, and then he was no longer in the NHL just 5 short years later, but his impact extends well beyond that. He is a fierce advocate for the development of the game amongst Native peoples. And because of that, we have no choice but to Guy. Welcome to the Hall of Guy, Jonathan Cheechoo.
Much as Jonathan Cheechoo has a strange permanent place in San Jose Sharks lore, he now too has a strange permanent place here in the Hall. We appreciate you all coming to watch this. Democracy's messy. This is just a thing that we have to remember during this time of year. Democracy is a messy thing, but when ideas get hashed out, it is often the best ones that still end up coming through at the end. So we appreciate you sticking through. There are some other people that we appreciate that we'll take a moment to thank here. Those include producer Craig and all the coders behind him, our musical director Don Ham for that lovely theme music. I appreciate my two partners in crime here, but most of all, the three of us appreciate you, dear listener, for joining us. We also would appreciate if you wanted to tell a friend about the show, share it anywhere you can with bit.ly/rememberthatguy, all one word, all lowercase. Everything you need to know about us is there. And that's everything I think you need to hear from me this week. Do either of you have any parting words here for the RTG faithful?
R.I.P. Dikembe Mutombo.
R.I.P. Dikembe Mutombo. And those are the only eulogies I think we need to make.
Man, from every perspective, Dikembe Mutombo is one of the all-time greats. Like, the play on the court, he's indisputably one of the greatest defensive centers of all time. His contributions to humanity are too numerous to recount them all on this podcast. And then to also have it on the record that you're packing absolute dawn and would ask everybody in the locker room who wants to sex Mutombo. He's a good person on the court. He's a great player on the court. He's a better person off it. And he also has a really big dick. And I just think we need to remember that.
Dikembe Mutombo, we will remember you. I've been one of your hosts, James.
I've been the very special guest, Xavier.
And I'm Diaz. And you fantasy football players, remember to pay attention. Check your lineups because it is the first guy week.
This is a song dedicated to the greatest player ever to play hockey, Jonathan Cheechoo. He is the greatest player ever in the history of ever. It is our hope and our dream that this song is played every time Jonathan Cheechoo scores, which is a lot, because he's really good. Train, train, Cheechoo, train. Our team's gonna win this game. Cheechoo! Oh, yeah, Cheechoo! Oh, yeah. Train, train, Cheechoo, train. Our team's gonna win this game. Cheechoo! Oh, yeah, Cheechoo! Oh, yeah. Train, train, Cheechoo, train. Our team's gonna win this game. Cheechoo! Oh, yeah, Cheechoo! Yeah, yeah.